it's my sense that almost no work has been done in this area of discussion. So, right, in the present, what we are discussing is the intersection of recommendation algorithms, things like what movie Netflix suggests you might want to watch, and artificial intelligence. Now, quite a bit of work has been done at this intersection for economic reasons. Companies like Netflix want you to stay on their site, so there is quite a bit going on there. But to my knowledge, very little or perhaps nothing has been done in the area of human freedom, AI, and recommendation algorithms. So the plan today is to begin mapping out what this area of investigation might look like, what kinds of questions arise, what dilemmas exist, what pathways forward might we find. So I believe that everything is very, very contemporary. However, I also believe that the questions circulating through this area of investigation, the questions perhaps started more than 300 years ago with a philosopher named John Locke, who proposed the following thought experiment. What he asked us to imagine is a situation where we are in a room which is extremely pleasurable. That is, you can see here we have wine and we have a wonderful view, have a nice something to lay on. You're in the room doing whatever you like. You are happy. You have no reason to leave. You don't want to leave. So you spend your time doing your little things in your room, but unbeknownst to you, someone has locked the door from the outside. So you cannot leave. And the question that Locke asks there is, well, are you free at that point as a human being? Do you have autonomy? You feel free, of course. You're doing whatever you want to do. You don't even realize the door is closed. But are you truly or genuinely free? And here, what John Locke says is no. He says, you are not free because you do not have the ability to change what you want. You're getting what you want in this great room, but you cannot change. You cannot change what you want, and in a certain sense, you cannot change who you are, because you keep repeating these very pleasurable actions in this room. Okay, so that's 300 years ago. What does this have to do with recommendation algorithms? Well, what we want to say is, it seems like something like Netflix is doing almost the same thing. It's recommending movies, films, documentaries that satisfy us, that we want to watch, that we enjoy. But the way it is doing that is by generating a list of recommendations from our past interests, from the movies we have given 5 stars to, from the documentaries we have watched all the way through. So the result is, in a certain sense, we are trapped in the interests and preferences that we have already established. We are happy in front of our TV watching Netflix. We're getting what we want. But there's no way to change what we want, because everything we are offered resembles the things we have seen in the past. So if you watched Indiana Jones and you loved it, then the next thing you get is Mission Impossible or something. Now, as it happens, something like this was referenced in the New York Times just this weekend. It came up. in this article in the magazine, specifically there's this experience that is referenced, which has actually happened to me and maybe happened to you guys too, where you go to an Airbnb and you turn on the TV and it's someone else's Netflix, and you look at these films that are suggested and you think, where did that come from? I did not even know those things existed. There are all these programs that are completely foreign to you. Right? So I think that what that shows is how much of a silo there is in Netflix. How you can be, trapped is not the right word because you're happy. How you can be satisfied by this range of movies and films that are completely different than anyone else's. And that satisfaction keeps you in the silo because you keep getting what you want. So again, I think what we're replicating here with Netflix is the John Locke experiment. Now, very quickly, how does Netflix actually do this? What are their tools? Here are two things that Netflix really does. One is, and Spotify does this too. One is, if you like a movie like Indiana Jones, they try to figure out what other movies are like that movie, maybe similar actors or a similar plot or something. And then they recommend you that, right? So if you liked one thing, you get something else, which is just like what you've already enjoyed. The other strategy they use, collaborative filtering, is they try to find a kind of twin for you out in the world. So if Marianne likes Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible, and I like Mission Impossible and Indiana Jones, and then she watches another Mission Impossible movie and enjoys it, then that movie will be recommended to me. Again, it's the same thing. Whether it's my own past and my own interests or my interests as they're reflected off someone else, I'm caught in the preferences that I have already established. So, as a quick note, it's true that Netflix doesn't matter. I mean, who cares if you're imprisoned by Netflix? I mean, who cares if you don't have human freedom when you're on your sofa, drinking a beer, watching a movie? Doesn't matter. But you can move up levels, right? From Netflix to Twitter. If you get to LinkedIn, then you're talking about your professional life. If you get to Tinder, then you're talking about your personal life, who you will marry. If you're searching, I was speaking with some of our panelists about where we live. One way you end up living somewhere is the real estate engine recommends apartments for you. Same thing. Maybe in the future, when we are choosing the genetic makeup of our children, we will get recommendations. Right? Do you want child A or B, right? Suited to you and your own past, right? Your own established preferences. So I think it's true, of course it's true, that Netflix is not a profound subject, but I believe that the dilemmas that are at play in Netflix recommendations are significant now and will be very significant in the future, significant for our human freedom. Okay, so we're getting toward the end of the introduction. The last 2 points. The first one is, well, what can we do? If, and you don't have to accept this, maybe you don't believe John Locke's definition of freedom, but if you accept that freedom means the ability to change who you are, then for recommendations, what we want is not something we already want, because that just keeps us who we are. And not something we don't want, because that's not a recommendation. That's like random. We want a film, a documentary, something that we could want. Not something we want now, but something we could want. Something that would correspond with different kinds of interests that we don't yet have. Something that would indicate a sort of enjoyment that we have not yet experienced. That's what we would look for if we want to have human freedom in these recommendation algorithms. Right? We want suggestions that help us change the kinds of things we want, that help us develop new preferences. And then, penultimate point, this is a really hard problem. Mary Lou will talk about this perhaps in a bit. We need to find things, in order to get this kind of recommendation, we need to find things that are unfamiliar, right? Something that's not like what we've seen before. But it also has to be engaging, relevant. If you stop for a second and think about that, that's extraordinarily difficult. How exactly do you find that kind of film to recommend for a user? Something that they've never seen before or thought of before, kind of like when you walk into the house with someone else's Airbnb set, someone else's Netflix set. So it's completely foreign, but it's also engaging. That's the difficulty. Good, so that is the introduction. This is the problem. The problem is that recommendation algorithms provide convenience and satisfaction, but they diminish freedom by limiting our future prospects to our established preferences. We are imprisoned by who we are. So that is the introduction. Now I would like to get to the significant part of our evening and welcome our guests, ANUSHA, Mary Ann, and Mary Lou from Charlotte. And I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves and perhaps intersect with what I have said to a certain extent. Okay, ANUSHA, please.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is ANUSHA DANDAPANI. I'm the Chief of Data and the AI practice at United Nations International Computing Center. United Nations International Computing Center is one of the entities within the UN system. The role that we play is that we support all our UN partner agencies with their data and the AI needs. I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach a data-driven storytelling course. I teach a master's program at Fordham in summer at NYU SPS. I connected with James perhaps 2-3 years ago. I don't remember. And we had, yeah, that's true. And we spoke about a lot of things that were relevant philosophically and also algorithmically. So that's why we are here and happy to sort of have an engaging discussion on this topic. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marianne Powers. I have been working in digital marketing for decades. I started out in digital video, video games, and started making websites in the mid-90s. And then that led to making global digital marketing campaigns for huge brands. I'm now an executive producer in the XR space. I am I'm part of the MIT Reality Hack. I'm also part of the XR Guild, which is a group of professionals who are driving ethics in the XR world. That's all about me.
Terrific. And Mary Lou, if you could.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mary Lou Meyer, and I'm a professor at UNC Charlotte. I'm also directing the research community initiatives at the CRA now, which is the Computing Research Association. My research for many years has been about AI models that could be called computational creativity. So how can we make computers creative? The relevance of that to this panel discussion is that one of the ways that we've been utilizing the results of this research, so how to make AI creative, is now being used to encourage human curiosity and to build AI systems that help people be more creative. And in recommender systems, that means exactly what we're talking about here. How could the AI put information or recommendations in front of people that encourages them to be curious? And what does curious mean? It means it's sort of this desire to know something you don't know already. But there's a sweet spot, and it's something that was brought up just a few minutes ago. How do you do that? If you continue to give people exactly what they like, that won't encourage curiosity, but it's super effective. The recommender systems that do that serve the purpose that the company who built the recommender system likes. Netflix wants you to see movies you like and will keep feeding them to you. We talk about serendipity in our research, and serendipity is a chance. It's putting some random something in front of you and encouraging you to try it. But the problem is, if that random something isn't at all connected to what you like, you're not going to want it. So you can't just put random things in front of people. So what my research group has done is looked at that sweet spot, not the same and not too far away from what you like, but something that guides you to learn more about things you don't know by taking small steps. Find something you like, combine it with something you don't know about, and then lead the person along what we call a surprise walk. And that encourages curiosity. The challenges with that are, first of all, it may be that you don't watch as many movies as you would if you only got the ones you liked, so Netflix might not like it. The second problem is it's hard to compute that. I said it, but it's hard to compute. I'll leave it there.
Okay, terrific. I think we will come back to that and ask you later for a sort of specific human example. But keeping the cycle going in the same direction, I thought I would ask ANUSHA. This is from the United Nations. It's a United Nations publication. And here they are saying that algorithms should not control what people see. The UN chief says, launching a global principles for information integrity. Now, it seems to me that, in fact, algorithms will control, to a certain extent, what people see, regardless of whether we want that to be true or not. So I wanted to ask ANUSHA, in the area of the United Nations and countries and politics and all the things the messy things that I know you're wound up in, how do you see the question of recommendation algorithms and human freedom arising? And is anything being done in the United Nations on this front?
Yes, and not yet. Yeah. And perhaps that is the good starting point to respond to this question. Yeah. From a humanitarian perspective, these kind of recommendation engines, which are opaque, are not necessarily favored in the instances of public sector and humanitarian sector. Yeah. So we are sort of looking at it from a lens of making sure that there is transparency and also ability to audit the recommendation engines, and also considerations of how do we want to trace and mitigate the biases that these recommendation engines come about. So the approaches that we usually consider, so we are more of an action-oriented organization within the UN system. So we do support our humanitarian agencies with AI based solutions. Yeah. So one of the sort of first principles that we do operate with is to make sure that the models or the recommendation algorithms that we build has the component of the human in the loop. What we mean by human in the loop is human has the right to override the recommendation in algorithms output. And that kind of gives us not only the opportunity to override, but also trace and track and also identify ways in which we can build a better feedback mechanisms to these recommendation algorithms, because the feedback of what goes back into these machine learning algorithms is the golden set for these recommendation algorithms to sort of recommend what you would like to see, the point that Mary made about the curiosity aspect of it. How do we go about integrating this concept of freedom, right? The concept of freedom needs to be thought through at the design stage of these algorithms, not at the end stage, because end state is too late for us to go back and fix it, right? How can we sort of trace back these sort of algorithms is an important factor to consider. From a UN perspective, governance comes first, and for us to make sure that we are upholding ourselves with the responsible AI approaches, making sure that we are handling these data sets with the sensitivity to PII data, that is personally identifiable information, and making sure that we are not introducing bias at the training stage itself is something that we do handle these algorithms incredibly sort of with a responsible mindset. Coming back to your topic of how do we think way forward, what does our future look like, is for us to make sure that we criticize the opaqueness of these recommendation algorithms and making sure that we bring forth the transparency of like how these recommendation algorithms have been built and how they can be auditable, and how do we introduce this concept of human in the loop where we have the right to override the recommendation algorithms output. Those are sort of mitigation steps that we do take from a UN perspective. Yeah.
Sure. Could I just ask just a little bit more? So it seems to be one area that would be natural for you would be in the area of politics. So recommendation algorithms in political discussions on Twitter, anyone has noticed very quickly that if they type in something that is favorable in the United States now for either Trump or Harris, then right away they will start getting tweets which favor this candidate or the other candidate. And I suppose that would happen internationally as well, whether it's in Mexico or Malaysia or what have you. Is that something you intersect with at all, how this polarization in politics could disrupt sort of social well-being, and any sort of countermeasures that you have seen?
Yes and not yet, right? Like, perhaps I will I will respond to that question with that kind of context setting, right? Like, we are building out, perhaps Jason can also speak to any of you later. We are building an election monitoring sort of algorithm for us to flag things or flag content that are not only polarizing content, but also content that leads more towards racism, it leads more towards gender bias, and also sort of things that can actually go wrong from an individual. So these social media platforms, they do exacerbate these biases which are already existing in these algorithms. So what we are currently looking at it is from an algorithmic lens. How can we use algorithm to fight these kind of misinformation? The approach that we are considering and we are trying to sort of research with the academic institutions is to creating better alerting mechanisms, right? Like, we can definitely flag these content as not sort of right now only Facebook and Twitter. Twitter no longer has that ability for us to flag some content to say this is explicit content or this is racist content. But Facebook and Instagram does have that sort of reporting mechanisms for you to flag some of these content which are not only polarizing and also sensitive. So we are working towards that kind of an approach where we can audit these content that are there in social media platform from a political context and sort of an election monitoring perspective. How do we want to inform the community to be aware of what is misinformation versus what is factually verified or content that is cross-verified content? That is the approach that we are looking at right now. Yeah.
Right. It seems very difficult, especially in the area of misinformation, because my misinformation is your information and vice
yes.
versa. So it seems like there's sort of two strategies to respond to that. And one is you can try to go meta and try and say, this is the truth and this is false. But then the other strategy is to say, look, instead of that, we're going to admit that we don't know what is true and what is false, but we are going to try to show to each side a little bit of the other side's material, right? So let's say if I vote for party A, then I'm going to see some things which are favorable to party B instead of just getting funneled into my own sort of world. And maybe that one way to solve the misinformation problem is not by figuring out what is true and what is false. Instead, it's, as we're saying, it's creating recommendation algorithms which make sure that you see both sides of the, right? It's a different approach. It's two different approaches to the same problem.
Yes.
I'd love to add on that. So there was just an interview with Bill Adair from PolitiFact. Did you see it? Oh, well, he's just come out with a book called The Big Lie. And in his interview, he did talk about using AI to help fact checking, right? So he started the PolitiFact website in 2007, and it's a very manual process, right? They're like, okay, we kind of like listen to what's out there, and then we have a deep journalistic process where we validate, and then they have their truth-o-meter, pants on fire. But he was saying how, not only can you use kind of algorithms and AI to like, let's see what's going on, what's the buzz out there, and then we're going to research on this thing. But the challenge then is the lie is already out there, and you can't like get the truth out there. So the platforms could certify these things. They could use the validation of PolitiFact and then like make annotations. So it's how can we use the technology in favor of fact checkers? And because it's too much of a labor intensive to like go chase down every single lie. But you could kind of, as a whole, there's a story about Obama and his passport, and we're going to come up with a statement on that, and then we're going to make sure that that gets distributed or validated or whatever. Any thoughts on the kind of that approach?
Perhaps it's very politically sensitive to talk about election and the election fever that we are in right now. Perhaps I can take the example. All of us have Instagram accounts, and all of you have newsfeed in your Instagram. Perhaps if you're following CNN or New York Times or BBC News or Al Jazeera, all these media institutions have agreed that if they are going to put any content which is sensitive content in your newsfeed, you have to alert your the consumer ahead of time that this content is sensitive. Right? Like, not all media platforms or channels have agreed to this kind of an approach. Overarching approach is we can only have the guidance given to these media platforms and channels to consider channeling this first before you don't want your news feed to be flooded with what's happening right now with the Ukraine-Russia war. You have the opportunity to block that content, to say that I don't want to see this kind of content in my news feed. It is a long haul process, and we are not there yet, but we are in the right tangential direction in how do we want to give these guidance to the media channels, right? Like, social media platforms are aggregator platforms. They aggregate this information across multiple channels, not just Twitter or Instagram. And if you look at TikTok, all of these social media platforms have a different level of recommendation algorithms that's in the play. For us to use AI to monitor all of these algorithms and the recommendation engines is like casting a wide net and figuring out where things can go wrong. But having this collaboration with independent agencies like media channels, where the media channels, they come to agree that they will comply with the standards that we are proposing to them, is the first step that we can and also especially with reporting channels and also the political news channels, they have to comply to agree, right? Like, most of these recommendation algorithms are profit-driven algorithms. They are not actually driven by responsibility. And it's a fine balance, but there is opportunity for us to improve.
Terrific. Well, yes, thank you. You're right. There's a lot to do. And it's also interesting, this notion at the very end there, the profit versus responsibility. I think sometimes there's a conflict, but I think sometimes there's not. For example, if you're watching Netflix and you keep getting the same thing exactly over and over again, well, it's boring. So Netflix does have this financial motive, I think, to try to find some serendipity, to recommend things that are slightly different. And then in politics, it would be similar. Perhaps there's some financial incentive for a news site to actually once in a while show you something from a different perspective. But
I'd like to
please.
give some examples of where that financial incentive might be. I'll start with a political example, but I know it's sensitive. So then I'll go to an example of recommendations for food, because that's not as politically sensitive. But if you were to look at what I see on YouTube or what I see in my news feed, it wouldn't look like what you see in your news feed, even if we are politically aligned. Because I watch certain things, Jon Stewart, John Oliver, and I might be getting a lot of that, but you might be getting something else, even though we're politically aligned, because that's what I will click on. So that click-through is really important. This idea of recommender systems introducing serendipity by saying, okay, I really liked this John Oliver that touched on a social issue like obesity. It could use that information to find other things about obesity that may not be the same liberal perspective that I just saw. And that's what I mean by giving you something that they know you're interested in, but taking you away from your comfort zone. And so it's a pattern matching, and you talked about it before, similarity and difference. You want to balance similarity and difference. And that would encourage people to broaden their perspectives. I think you don't give up much in marketing, because once a person's broadened their perspectives, they might actually feel happy. They had felt there was some change, some good thing happened to them. They learned something they didn't know before, rather than keeping people in their information bubble. Now, let me give you a food example. Suppose I use a recommender system to recommend things for dinner, to recommend restaurants. It's always going to be recommending the things I like. And suppose I like I don't know, burgers and fries. So I keep getting American style restaurants, burgers and fries, steaks, but maybe it could see that I actually liked a restaurant that specialized in beef dishes. And then it could find a Japanese restaurant that serves beef, and then it would encourage me to step outside my comfort zone. Now I've broadened my horizons, and now I might actually look at more Japanese restaurants. So I don't believe that the recommender systems as they are now is the only way to keep people happy. I think people like new things. And that if that pitch could be presented, that you do want to get people to think about, to see other perspectives, and not just give them the opposite or something different, but find a common thread. It's a food they like, it's an issue in the political field. If I were watching the news and I was really interested in an issue on women's health, I should see both sides, not just one side, but the women's health is a common thread.
Terrific. So just to add a frame to what Mary Lou has said, she is a co-author of a brilliant paper on this subject with a somewhat vanilla title, actually, a survey of recent advances in algorithmic recommendation systems. But it's an excellent paper, exactly contemporary, and she investigates with her co-authors, investigates some specific ways that she's begun to allude to, that algorithmically we can find this balance between what is similar and what is different, or what in the philosophical world we call that identity indifference, but it's similar and different is fine. Mary Lou, could you give us a kind of example for, we have computer scientists here in the room, something that someone who's not a computer scientist like I could understand, but also something that would function well for a computer scientist, as to how, and I don't want to put you on a spot, but just as a possibility, use me as an example. How would you get me to want to have serendipity in the search for Netflix movies? Like, what would you look for in me? What kind of information would you want from me? How would you use that information to try to provoke a different kind of interest?
So the basis for the recommender system is a representation of the movie that you like. So every movie has, let's call them keywords just to keep it simple. ChatGPT has all words, but recommender systems have primarily operated on just keywords. And those keywords would describe maybe the genre. It would include some actors. It would include the topic of what the movie is about. So let's pick a movie. Inside Out 2. Okay, it's a kid's movie. It's about emotions. It's animated. It's 2024. Those are just a few keywords. And you like that. And it turns out that you like a lot of animated movies, and you like a lot of movies about emotions. And you like kids' movies. But it could say, okay, let's assume you're a kid, and let's pick something that is about emotions, but not animated. Or it's about animation, it uses animation, but not emotions. And so it slowly moves you into a direction where it's not matching everything about what you like. It's finding something you haven't seen before. It has your history. It knows you've never watched anything but animation. And it slowly moves you in a direction where you find things that aren't in your comfort zone because of the keyword matching. So you can imagine a space of words, and they have distances between them. And you're just having the algorithm move around that space by putting two things together that you've never watched before. Did that help?
Yes, I think so. It seems like there's two things going on intellectually. There's a kind of a balance between what is similar and what is different. You're trying to find, how many keywords should be shared and how many should be different when you go from the past to the new suggestion. But then there's also this idea that we just want something which is radically different in some sense. You're bringing together two things, the emotions but not animated.
Radically different usually doesn't work.
Okay.
What we want is incremental difference, because people have anxiety if it gets too different. And,
Okay.
and what you can get, we had this thing called surprise walks, and that was where we had your starting point. What were the keywords that were typical of the things that you consumed? A book, a movie, what you purchased on Amazon, what news you clicked on in your news feed. And then we have this goal that we want to actually move you over to watching more things that are less political. All you want to watch is politics. So you could, through those combinations of words, you could create a path there. So the algorithm guides you to be curious rather than bombards you with stuff that's really different.
Sure. Now it's focused in my mind what my question was. You have this process that could work through keywords, which presumably are attached to each film, right? So a film has a set of keywords. Is there a different process you could use where you would look at an individual user like James Brousseau and say, well, he's an American, maybe we should look for a user from France and use that as a kind of difference. Or he's a male, maybe we should look for a female, use that as a kind of difference. I mean, in the play of similarities and differences that you are experimenting with, what are the boundaries of those similarities and differences? Is it just keywords for the movies? Or is it possible to go beyond that and say, look, let's also consider what language the person speaks. Let's consider other kinds of things.
Yeah, so the keywords I put on the item that you're being recommended as an example, but you could think about our own profile as it's a simplistic view of it, but keywords. Everything I watch, it can be reduced to keywords. So, and my profile, she, her, age between 60 and 70, everything's a keyword. And so we could see who's similar in almost all of my so-called keywords, but different in one. And then we could see what that person watches. But it's the same idea. It's combining, looking at what we're comfortable with in terms of the keywords or the items, and looking at what we're missing and bringing that in gradually, whether you do it by looking at what people like me watch, or whether you're looking at the keywords of the items I've selected.
Sure. It requires a lot of experimentation, obviously. And I suppose only a very few platforms have the data which is necessary to actually do these kinds of experiments.
They have all the data.
Yeah.
They have more than they should.
So yes, please, Mary.
Hi, Mary Lou. You can't see me, but I can see you. This is very unusual. Anyway, I am I'm a content producer and a marketer. And so I know we're talking about kind of the recommendation algorithm in this like the somewhat neutral space of films. But even just thinking about Netflix, there's this idea of the decay of the platforms, which hopefully I'll get to talk to later, unless we're
This
here
is
till
just where I was
midnight.
going to go with this question, so please.
But here I'm going to be the devil's advocate here and say like, okay, so what is Netflix commercial route? Like, what is their goal here? And when I look at their business model, like they are in a state of decay. We have all cut the cord on cable. Like we used to, have cable TV and you would like flip through channels and there was a little bit of serendipity. Like, yes, of course, I watched a lot of, NBC or whatever it was, Comedy Central or whomever. And so there was serendipity in that I would watch a certain channel or that's where it would be because that's where I left it. And they would serve me something. And it was usually something I liked because it was a channel that I liked. But there was also kind of an aspect of like, I'm flipping through the dial and there was a lot of serendipity there. Anyway, Netflix comes along, says, we're going to give you just what you want and nothing else, only what you want. And we're like, oh, this is fantastic. And I don't have to pay for all this other nonsense that I don't want. So then we all abandon cable and now we all have like 20 subscriptions, which probably cost almost as much. And now they're downgrading the offering. Right. So this will go, it's about this idea of decay. But one of the things they could do with their recommendation algorithm is they can kind of move the dial on like, hey, these films cost us more money. So we're going to get you to prefer stuff that doesn't cost as much money for us to serve you. Or like, there's a screenwriter's strike. And so we're going to start to lean into reality TV, whether you like it or not, you're going to end up loving it. Like they get to move the dial on our exposure to the content because we have abandoned our other platforms and like we're hooked. And of course, they're also using all that data to sell our data to marketers who are trying to sell us stuff. And so all those platforms that are in the middle are actually using us as a product to sell to the advertisers who are trying to sell us products, and they're just brokers. Anyway, that's my like devil's advocate point of view. If you want to add anything to that.
Well, I will ask you directly. Do you think that what we have been talking about here, what has been proposed with respect to perhaps politics of the United Nations or Netflix by Mary Lou. Do you think that there's some intersection with this phenomena? So she calls just, well, could you tell us what you call this? And
Well-known author and journalist Cory Doctorow, he wrote an article for Wired magazine a year ago called "The Enshittification of TikTok." And it's about the decay of platforms and how we have, Google's a perfect example. So I'm sorry if I'm kind of preempting my question, but Google, way back when we were on dial-up modems and AOL, like the page took forever to load because there were so many ads on it, and Yahoo, the same thing. And so Google said, they even wrote a paper that said any search engine that is using advertising as their business model is not serving the users. That was a paper they wrote in 1998. And guess what Google's doing now? And where's AOL and Yahoo? Gone. And, and it was important at the time. It was like, oh, this is great. The Google page loads really fast. I only get the results I want. We all went to it. And Google has all of that data. Now they service the sponsored ads. So they get paid for the sponsored ads. There are targeted ads, right? So there's the sponsored results. Those sponsored results end up getting higher ranks because the algorithm for the ranked results are based on who gets the most clicks. So that's also a feedback loop. So imagine like I go to Google to ask a question about my diet, right? And Google already knows quite a few things about me. So my sponsored results are going to be like, purple carrot or something like that, like, oh, hey, miracle solution for you, miracle diet. And then below that might be WebMD, right? But WebMD, if I go to their website, that answer is going to be full of sponsored content that looks a lot like content, which will probably sell me like miracle diet solution, right? And then what I might have really needed was something further down the search results. That's like a real professional healthcare person who has the real answer that I actually needed. But because there's no monetization of that content, I will never see it. So, and then that also has systemic bias to it in that if I was a different person who searched questions about my diet, they might serve up, I don't know, something from Walmart, like come here and get your frozen dinners or something, which aren't at all healthy. So anyway, that was my rant.
It's a good rant, and it connects a little bit also with what the other Mary was saying, her insight that perhaps serendipity is not necessarily against profit. It doesn't necessarily run against the Netflix fiduciary interest in keeping people on the platform. And so I wonder if, in this case, the enshittification of platforms, as I understand it, your reasoning is that the reason this tends to happen to platforms is for the money.
Yes.
I wonder if the kind of thinking that we have for serendipity that, well, maybe actually helping people be different can be profitable too. I wonder if that could somehow salvage some of these platforms to some extent, or if you think it's just a hopeless situation.
Well, I mean, that's where it's really interesting is that, I mean, these platforms have gotten so big mostly because they had killed everybody else, like Amazon. Oh my gosh, right? So like you've got the FANG, right? You've got Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. They've like killed their competitors. They're monopolies essentially. But imagine that somebody came up with a search engine that honors your privacy and is transparent about their recommendation algorithms. And maybe they even like validate the fact checking, or maybe they even kind of watermark AI generated content and provide sources like Perplexity does. That would be a solution that we would all be like, oh my gosh, we now as a sophisticated audience and user of the internet are like, sign me up for that. Who's going to pay for that? So the I've worked in advertising my whole life. Of course, like companies like Coca-Cola and Wendy's and McDonald's, they deserve to make money selling their product. And of course, they're going to want to target their audiences. But at what point are those platforms that we're using not serving us anymore when we're the product? So
Right. Yes, I think that's certainly true. It's difficult to imagine how that can be rescued, but perhaps serendipity, or this idea that algorithms that promote differences instead of the same thing over and over again, there might be something in that helps platforms, just like there is something in that which helps the United Nations to a certain extent solve the misinformation problem.
You know, one of the things that I've been talking about recently that I think is a factor that hasn't come up. We've been talking about how can the companies make money out of us if they were to do this serendipitous. I think that we are part of the problem too, that enough people don't understand what's happening to them. Enough people don't understand how this AI works. And as a consequence, we keep continually click on the clickbait stuff that we're fed, and we feel happy about it. And one thing I've been advocating for is something called AI literacy. You don't have to become an AI specialist, but you have to be AI literate in order to function responsibly in the world. If enough people became AI literate and they realized what was happening with these systems, and they would always scroll down to get to that one that was the real medical information instead of the clickbait at the top, then the companies would have to change their business model because we weren't behaving the way they expected us to behave. So I think, first of all, it would be nice if companies would be responsible, and it would be nice if companies didn't put the profit above the well-being of the human race. Won't happen. But how can we, as the people who are the product, change ourselves so that we push them to not continue to feed us this garbage?
Okay, that brings us around to the last question. Unless, Anusha, do you have something you want to toss in?
I think I will let you go to the last question.
Okay, we'll go still. The last question, then I would like to give some time for the people on the floor too, who we have such excellent guests to have a chance to ask questions. Just very quickly, the last question. The premise of Mary Lou's previous point was, in some sense, it's better to not be happy. It's preferable to be, in some sense, free. That is, within this world of recommendation algorithms, what she is saying is, if I heard her correctly, AI literacy means learning to resist the Netflix constant repetition of what we have already seen. But I just want to pose that as a question. Do we want to resist? I mean, maybe there's something good about just accepting the clickbait. Maybe just watching the same movie over and over again is not such a bad thing. Or stated slightly differently, do we want to change who we are? Do we want to have new preferences, diverse viewpoints? Or perhaps there is just a happiness in accepting what the machines are giving us. Anusha cannot wait, so please.
I think the question needs to be restructured. It's not about are we evaluating whether we are serendipitous or not. It's about the choice that we have is not being given to us. As a consumer community or a user community, you need to be given the choice to choose what you consider as serendipitous to you. In this case, the choice is made by these recommendation algorithms is the problem, right? And how do we sort of like, backtrack this problem? Because we, as the producers of the data of you, we own the data, okay? If you are the producer of the data, you own the data. We have not been given the choice to share our data to these recommendation algorithms. They have taken our data without seeking consent from us. That is the point that we need to address with these recommendation algorithms. Do you want to be chosen by them, or do you want to make your own choice? Right? One of the things that YouTube recently implemented is to make sure that before you register and create your account in YouTube or Instagram, they ask you, are you 18 years or older? Because If you're 18 years or older, you have the human ability to make your own choice. You're eligible to vote. So you can decide for yourself whether you want to do this or not, right? So if these recommendation algorithms, the consumer community of these algorithms have the consent to choose, the recommendation algorithms behaviors will change.
Excellent response. Thank you. Yes, it's true, right? Step back, let the person choose if they want to be manipulated or not, right? That makes a lot of sense. Yes.
And I would build on that. I mean, kind of where we were talking a minute ago about, you know, that having AI literacy and absolutely important, and our platforms should absolutely not only, because there's like the, oh, agree to these cookies and everybody just clicks it, but like really like that they have to go further than that. Right. They have to tell us more specifically. And like the recommendation is like, hey, this has been recommended based on your history. Would you like to see something completely different? You know, like that option has to be much more apparent and lifted up and transparent. But I would say that like it's not enough for us to be literate. I think it has to go further than that. And I do think that our systems are not serving us right now because they're benefiting those very same platforms that are making the most money. You know, I mean, they're even getting between us and the McDonald's, like they're even getting between us and the Coca-Colas, and they are monopolizing, and we do need government regulation. Sorry to say it, I'm a total like far left person and I hate saying regulation, but this isn't enough of like, oh, I'm just going to choose not to watch Netflix because I don't like their algorithm. Like that's not going to do it.
All right, so we do have that question then. If we could make it profitable, then we would not need the regulation. If we could make serendipity profitable, we would not need the recommendation. But you think we can't make serendipity profitable?
No, because marketers want to target a
Right.
white woman in
Yeah,
her
yeah.
50s to sell her the next Whole Food delivery.
Yeah.
Right?
The marketers will always win in a certain sense. Yeah.
Right.
Mary Lou, would you like to add to
could
this?
Come back to that question. Do we want that serendipity, or do we just want to be happy with what we like? I think that's a really interesting question. But I think the answer is we'll never be happy with just what we like. I think the whole nature of our being from the day we're born is to need something to be different every once in a while, or we get bored. Even people who watch the same TV shows over and over and over again, the TV show, if it didn't change, if it was a Groundhog Day, that wouldn't be good enough. So we do need some change in our life. I think everybody has a different appetite for change. Some people like a little change, some people like a lot, but nobody likes no change. So I think humans don't work that way. The second point I wanted to make was about the recommender systems should give us choice. Recommender system algorithms cannot go away. There's too much information out there. You can't search the entire list of movies in the whole world. They have to be ordered in some way. They have to be pulled out in small bites for you to review them. And you would never have enough time in an evening to see all the movies in their database before you make a decision on what to watch. So they're out there. So I think, yes, we need change. And ultimately, and I think companies are starting to think about how to introduce serendipity into it because people do need change, and we'll never be able to live without the recommender systems.
Okay, so in a certain sense, to be happy, we need to be a little bit unhappy occasionally with respect to the movies we get, I suppose.
You're assuming change makes us unhappy. You've equated change
Yes,
with,
true enough, true enough.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Happy or some other. Yes. Thank you. Well, we have such terrific guests. I would like to give an opportunity for people who are here to ask a question about any of these subjects, if you like. I will drift out into the into the audience.
Thanks. This is a really deeply important problem that we're solving. I'm really glad and thankful for the guests to discuss this. My question would be to Mary Lou, if this makes any sense. Like, if companies start charging for their products, will the customer have more say in what they might want to get access to? Like, for example, more serendipity if they decide to pay, and they get more options, and rather than just just be nudged by algorithms instead.
I think we are part of the problem. I think what you're saying is, would companies give us more variety if we are willing to pay for it? I don't think it should be our responsibility to pay more for more choice. I think we should be encouraged to try and find different things, and then the algorithms will adapt to that. If they find that you're not always picking the same thing that you've seen before. So it goes both ways. The companies need to offer it, and we need to be more curious about what we look at.
Got it. Correct. Thanks.
Hi, my question is to ANUSHA. Since you have emphasized so much on, maintaining transparency and abiding by the, audit requirements, what do you think, what sort of ethical consideration developers have to undergo while, designing this recommendation system, to expand this human freedom in future?
Yeah, I think in future, the way these recommendation engines will be ranked for themselves, right? Like, I know this is the era where we are influenced by Hugging Face, or like, what's there in sort of Kaggle, where the Kaggle kind of rates the kind of algorithms that are incredibly sort of efficient and whatnot. It's optimized, right? In future, there will be algorithms that have the safety first as also a parameter for assessing these algorithms. Like, for example, if these recommendation engines that are built has the safety first as one of the parameters, they will be sort of like, recommended more, or like we would perhaps use more of those algorithms with the trust process that we build around these algorithms. To make sure that we are using those algorithms for the right reasons and the right purpose also, right? All these recommendation algorithms, we need to sort of start understanding not only from a design stage, but also what is the purpose of this algorithm? Yeah, like you have to ask that question, okay, you built this recommendation engine, what is it meant to do? Right? And you have to also clarify this recommendation engine is not meant to do A, B, and C also. If those recommendation engines clarify that, those recommendation engines are the best designed sort of algorithms, and developers should look up to these sort of examples because clarifying what this doesn't do is far more important than what it does.
Understanding the purpose.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Shweta. I have a question for Mary Lou. When we talk about AI literacy, so it feels a biased recommendation because not everybody has resources to like learn about AI or ML. Like there are people like old age people, they don't want to learn about ML or AI, or the people who are not barely like 10th grade, who graduated just 10th grade. So, and almost all of the people now use AI. So what is the solution for them? Like we as kids or present generation, we can look after ourselves, but what about the people who don't have the resources to learn about these stuff?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing with one of my PhD students is looking at, we just published a paper on what would be that AI for all adjustable curriculum. So what do we want people who are, finished with school, they're in the workforce, maybe even retired, what's the critical information they need to be responsible citizens in the age of AI? What do we want K-6 to know? And so we've come up with this sort of adjustable curriculum where we published it. We're trying to get course materials out there and see how different organizations can move with that. So if it's for the public, it should be at libraries. It should be being promoted through their social media. Take this 20-minute AI literacy course. We're also advocating that it's not just how does the AI work, but also the socio-technical, about a little bit about the ethics and the bias, so that people become critical users of AI. So you're right, it is a huge problem, but we have to start somewhere. Everyone now has become digital literacy. We're kind of comparing it to, a few decades ago when computers and the internet were kind of new. People learned it. AI is a little bit different because it has ethical issues as well as technical issues, but people should learn that. It should be absolutely required.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is that for all of us, or all of you actually, that if through advertising, branding, and creative computation, there's a lot of content directed towards me, like everything is directed towards the user, then do you think the users will start ignoring it and like everything is directed towards me and now I just want to change and I'm going to ignore all of this?
I think that kind of speaks a little bit to the savvy users. I mean, the younger generation like yourself are like my 17-year-old kid is like, I hate advertising. The more advertising I see in my feed, the more I hate that place. And frankly, and she's studying computer science and all of you guys are here. I hope you build the thing that we will all go to. So this is why it is so important for us to talk about ethics with everyone in this industry. And listen, I was there for the beginning of the internet and we were like, this could go really well or it could go really badly. And what was great about it is it brought the whole world together. Like, oh, I can now talk to people across the world. And, I mean, there was a whole subculture movement that came out of it because like now I know trans activists that could work with other trans people that they never would have met before. So there was a lot of amazing things that happened with the internet. And then also we created these bubbles and, so it's absolutely important that we lean into these ethical issues as professionals in this field. So, I'm in the XR Guild. I recommend that you all go to the XR Guild website, look at the 12 principles that we have. We're going to be rewriting them for next year because now we need to talk about AI. And lean into ethics. Your kids, you want to know this stuff before you get into the field, and you can say, why don't we do this ever so slightly different? And we might actually get a bigger slice of the pie because we're going to get the young audience that is more savvy than the folks that abandoned AOL and went to Google or abandoned cable and went to Netflix or whatever. So that's my hope.
So it's a quick question, could be a little bit controversial. So just have like an open view on it. So do you think there's the systematic bias in the content chosen by news channel affect or have a similar effect of what we discuss about Netflix recommendations or LinkedIn recommendation systems?
Is that for ANUSHA or anybody?
Oh, it's for the entire panel. So news channels, similar contents chosen by, not similar content, but the content chosen by news channels, they kind of have like a systematic bias into it. That, for example, Bloomberg will only explain or cover news on finance, right? CNN will cover on politics, stuff like that, right? So that kind of bias, would that affect or have similar effects of the recommendations that we talked about have on Netflix, LinkedIn.
I feel like it's all connected because I mean they're all selling the data back and forth to each other.
Mhm.
And even like a Bloomberg or a NewYorkTimes.com or MSNBC, like they are in the business of selling advertising.
Mhm.
So they know who their target audience is.
Right.
And you know, so the white lady that's going to buy the Whole Foods is probably a Democrat, you know, like so then MSNBC knows that like they can sell ads to Whole Foods because the people that are watching Rachel Maddow are gonna go to Whole Foods, whatever it is. But like, I don't know that it's hard to say that the content is changed based on the bias. I mean, I'm not sure, but it is all, they're all sharing the same profile. And, you know, Google is using my search history to serve up ads. Facebook is using my likes to serve me content. Amazon is using my product history to refer products to me. You know, Netflix is then gonna, you know, sell my search history to MSNBC. I mean, whatever. Like it's all the same.
Okay.
Anything to add? Well, then, terrific. Please join me in thanking our very distinguished panelists. Thank you.